Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today on this episode, we need to talk about 4 baits that you need to be fishing in the month of June. Now, this was kind of a hard monthly bait video to put together because the list of baits that I'm going to show you are really just a fraction of the different techniques that you can have success with in the month of June. There's some months that are just way more defined as far as like the patterns that are going on. So there's only a handful of different baits that you want to throw during certain times of the year. But the month of June, you can pretty much do anything during June. You can fish shallow, you can fish deep, you can fish all the mid-ranges. There's a lot of stuff going on. So this was kind of a hard video to put together, but I've got 4 baits here that just are techniques that just really stand out. These are some that I really like to throw, and a couple of them are for very, very specific type of situations overall. So let's go ahead, dive right into it. Of course, we're going to have all of the links in the description below for the products that I'm talking about today. But let's go ahead and get started. So the first bait that I really want to show you, because I'm traditionally a shallow water power fisherman. I love fishing out deep and using my Lowrance electronics to find fish on structure and finding schools. That has been a lot of fun learning how to do that on the Tennessee River in recent years. But deep down at heart, I love beating the bank, and there's a really cool thing that happens for much of the country in the month of June. Sometimes it happens earlier in some regions, sometimes it even happens a little bit later in the month of July. But what I'm talking about is the mayfly hatch. So mayflies are a really big deal during the summertime. When you have that little 2-week window where you've got mayflies, you definitely want to be paying attention to that bite, because mayflies essentially emerge by the millions, by the billions, and then they start just flying around, and they're a huge food source for fish on lakes where this phenomenon happens. And so whenever I start seeing mayflies, I may be on like the best offshore bite ever, but as soon as I start seeing mayflies, I start beating the bank and fishing patterns that really attract bites in that type of scenario. And one of my favorite baits for a mayfly hatch is a frog. So a hollow body frog like this one right here is a really good mayfly hatch bait. And the reason for this is that most of the situations that I like to target bass that are really keyed in on the mayfly hatch is areas where you have overhanging trees. Whenever you have overhanging limbs, a lot of times that's where the mayflies like to congregate. You'll notice that the limbs are really starting to get weighted down, and they're even in some cases touching the water. That's because there's hundreds of thousands of mayflies on these branches weighing them down. And so I always look for those banks where I've got overhanging trees right over the water's edge. And a frog is a great presentation for being able to skip underneath those overhanging branches and just walk back underneath in that shadowy area. It's such a great pattern during the mayfly hatch. In fact, it's really a good solid pattern anytime you have that extreme shade that those overhanging trees provide. Because bass during the summertime, during the hot months, they want to escape that heat and be in the shade somewhere if they're living shallow. And so a frog is a really good one to skip underneath overhanging brush like that, especially during the mayfly hatch. So frog is a really good one. And again, I'm going to have all the tackle that I use with these baits in the description below. The next one is also kind of a shallow water power fishing bait that I like to throw this time of year, and it's primarily for dock fishing. So one of the things that I really like to focus on when I'm fishing shallow during the month of June is docks. Docks really do tend to hold a lot of fish and a lot of big fish during the month of June. And the reason for that is that June is even though it's like a post-spawn month, there's a lot of fish that really hang around those docks because they provide plenty of shade. A lot of times you may have, you know, fry guarders that are guarding, you know, bass fry around those docks. And also bluegills really like to use docks this time of year. And so one of my favorite baits to imitate those bluegills that are real prevalent around those docks is some sort of beaver style bait. My favorite is this E-Man Palmetto BugZ here. This one's a little kinked up from the heat. But the Palmetto BugZ is just one of my absolute favorite dock flipping baits. And you know, I think it's because it has a little bit of a glide to it, which I think is really important when you're fishing docks, is to have a bait that doesn't have a lot of like kicking appendages to create more of a parachute vertical you know, fall, but one that has a lot of surface area and is a little bit wider, so it has more of a horizontal fall. Not like really horizontal, but it'll kind of fall like this. Even better, a lot of times if I'm fishing this type of bait, instead of using a Texas rig, I may use like an Ozark rig type hook to skip underneath those docks to even have more of a horizontal glide. So regardless if I'm using a Texas rig, you know, a heavy style Texas rig, or the Ozark rig from Core Tackle, you know, I'm going to be using a bait like the Palmetto BugZ because it imitates the bluegill that are around those docks. But that seems to be a bite that is pretty common this time of year. I'm going to go ahead and pick up this trash. I don't want to litter. But yeah, the Palmetto BugZ is really a classic for me. It's something that, you know, if I'm not finding anything out deep, I really like to just go beat the bank and fish some docks. But the other two baits really are more offshore type technique. And the month of June for me is the opportunity to fish reaction baits to catch a bunch of fish if they're schooled up offshore. So like in June, I don't like to slow down all that much. I may throw a big worm. I've talked about that quite a bit. But if I have the opportunity to really take advantage of real active schools of bass, I want to make sure I'm using reaction style techniques. And the first one that I really like to throw on a school is going to be a flutter spoon. Okay, so if I'm faced with a situation where I've got a pretty large group of fish, so anything, you know, over 10 fish or something like that, you know, a spoon is a really good bait because it really does just kind of trigger those fish into more competitive mindset. And so I like to throw a big flutter spoon like this. This is actually a big flutter spoon. By today's standards, this is actually a pretty small one. But anywhere from those 5 to 10-inch flutter spoons are going to be really a great type of schooling bait this time of year, especially on the Tennessee River. And they just get some of the biggest bites in those schools. So this will be one of the first baits that I throw in the month of June on a big active school. The next bait that I really like to throw in the month of June on schooling fish is going to be a deep diving crankbait. This one right here is the Strike King 5XD. I don't have a partnership with Strike King, but I absolutely love this bait. It's just a fish catching machine. Caught a lot of fish, you know, especially in that you know, 12 to 16 foot zone. This is a really good bait for that depth zone. But a deep diving crankbait is made for June fishing, you know, because it's still, those fish are still pretty fresh. You know, they just in the last few weeks have moved offshore and they're still really active. They're feeding up pretty heavily, and so you don't have to slow down to catch those fish. And a crankbait is really good because you can fish it pretty slow, you know, on the bottom. You can just tick the bottom real slow, or how I like to fish it is like burning it back to the boat and getting those fish to react very aggressively. All right. And the great thing about a deep diving crankbait is you can choose between a rattle version or a silent version, and you can kind of and a lot of different you know, sounds in between, and you can mix and match and try to figure out what the fish prefer if they do have a preference. But anyways, those two are really good, you know, baits for fishing offshore, for schooling fish, and they're really great during the month of June. Like once you start getting into July and August, those fish have been beat up so hard for the months of May and June that really it's all about slow moving finesse tactics at that point, and the schools start breaking up anyway. So anyways, guys, those are 4 of my favorite baits to fish in the month of June. There's still so many other baits that you could throw in June. That's the wonderful thing about my birth month. You know, June 19th is my birthday, and June is just the perfect representation of my favorite month. So anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like, share, subscribe. If you have any questions at all, drop a comment below. Other than that, make sure you trust the process. I'll see you out on the water.